Good afternoon, colleagues, delegates. Please take your seat for the next session, which is session 1 of sub-theme 6. Can I kindly ask you to come to the front seats because it looks very empty like this. We have a huge room, and please come and join in the front seats. That would be wonderful.
Everyone is upgraded to business class.
Yeah. You are all upgraded to business class, and we don't need any volunteers to come here, so don't be worried about that.
And telling people, I don't know if he's already...
Myung-hyun.
No, talk to him, because then he'll tell you exactly what to do. Talk to him. No, talk to him.
Okay, good. It's all not. It's all fine.
Please come in front. So good afternoon, dear colleagues. I would like to warmly welcome you to this session. It is the first session of sub-theme 6. As you know, now in the Congress we are moving to the technical program, so we have the 6 sub-themes being in session, and this one is sub-theme 6. So let me give a few introductory remarks to the whole sub-theme 6. I would like to also welcome all colleagues and experts who join online to this session. Now, we have heard this morning already very much how this Congress is being organized at a very critical time. We are coming out, hopefully soon, out of the COVID pandemic. We have had a very successful, especially for forestry, COP in Glasgow. The parties to the Convention on Biodiversity are discussing right now the post-2000 biodiversity framework. We are almost half through the period of SDGs, which have to be delivered by 2030, and we have the International Decade on ecosystem restoration, which was just discussed in the session before. So I think this is really a critical moment for our planet, and we have heard that many times. Now, if we look at the global challenges we face today, the climate challenge, the water challenge, the energy challenge, the food security challenge, the disaster risk management challenge, the energy challenge, the biodiversity challenge, are there any of these challenges for which forests don't offer solutions? I don't think so. But are we ready, in fact, to offer solutions through forestry? In order to fully maximize this potential of forestry, we need to be much more proactive in bringing sectors together, in crossing administrative boundaries, be it in national governments, be it in international negotiations, etc. But also at the field level, we need to be much more proactive to bring forestry into the broader context of landscape management, forests as part of land use systems, together with agriculture, with pasture management, with livestock management. And we need to be more proactive in really bringing stakeholders together. So that's, my dear colleagues, that's the spirit or the direction in which sub-theme 6 would like to discuss during this week, how we can do that, how we can be more proactive in collaboration, in partnership development, in bringing sectors together, and to really maximize the benefit or the roles of forests in addressing these global challenges. So the overall objective of subtheme 6 is to is forest beyond forestry, or forests beyond boundaries. That's exactly the way we want to go. And that's also the way we have organized, we have shaped the 5 sessions which will go through the week. So today we are setting the stage, and I will come to that in a minute, how this is organized. Sessions 2, 3, and 4 are being organized by key partners, because we wanted to have a very strong ownership for that sub-theme, not just for the conference, but also beyond. So tomorrow in the morning, it's the Stockholm International Water Institute, C4 and UNEP. They are organizing a session 2, which is looking at forests beyond forest in a context of the SDGs. So they are focusing very strongly on the link between forest and water and how this contributes to the SDGs and how we need to be more proactive in collaboration. Tomorrow afternoon, session 3, we have the Rikoff Center, we have Isimod from the Himalaya, and we have Arcos from Africa. They are organizing a session specifically looking at the forest beyond forestry at the field level, giving examples of how this can be done at the field level in Asia, in Africa, and so on. On Wednesday, we have session 4, which is organized by the UNFF Secretariat and AFOCO, and they have set up a very interesting program to promote or to showcase very innovative partnerships which are not obvious that they have to do with forestry. And finally, on Thursday afternoon, we have a closing session where we look forward how we can strengthen collaboration beyond forestry, where we will have also Her Royal Highness who will be with us and giving her thoughts from the perspective of her vision and wisdom. And that's how we will close on Thursday this sub-theme 6. So for today, you see here a very distinguished panel where we will have 2 keynotes and then a panel which will reflect on the keynotes, what we have heard. And then in the end, we will have a short screening of a short video, which was one of the voluntary contributions to the Congress, which showcases a little bit the vision or the topic of the sub-theme. And then we will have representatives of the key institutions who are organizing sessions 2, 3, 4, and 5, who will give us lightning talks, what we expect from their sessions. So this is a very short introduction, and what we have always, we had a few keywords in the preparation of these sessions, and they are in fact in line with the very nice orchestrated screening of in the beginning, in the launch event this morning. So I think our discussions should be very positive, forward-looking, creative, innovative, but also memorable. So we hope that the discussions we will have during this week on sub-theme 6 will really be remembered and will have long-lasting impacts, especially practical impacts. With this introduction, I would like to immediately start introducing, I will introduce the speakers when it's their turn. So the first keynote speaker who is with us is Tony Simons, sitting next to me. So Tony Simons is for sure, he is well known to you. He's the Director General for the World Agroforestry Center and the Executive Director of C4ICRAF. Tony has worked for over 30 years on issues at the agriculture-forestry interface. This experience has been gained in over 50 countries in private sector, academia, official development assistance, and research. He has a PhD in tree genetics from Cambridge University, as well as an honorary professorship in tropical forestry at the University of Copenhagen. He has published over 100 research papers and has mentored dozens of young scientists in developing countries. Tony is passionate about the transformative and profitable change that the private sector can bring to the development, having established partnerships with Mars, Danone, Syngenta, Boehringer and Unilever. He also sits on various boards and investment committees, including Global Restoration Council, Acts Livelihoods Fund, and Tropical Landscape Finance Facility. So this is a very short introduction to, we could say many, many more things about Tony. Tony, the floor is yours. Thank you for being with us and for sharing with us your wisdom about collaboration in forestry. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Forests without boundaries. Enhancing management and collaboration. Surely an intriguing title. And I'd like to congratulate everyone in the room. You've come to the right session. We've got a fantastic program for you here today, some really engaging specialists for the panel. And my job is to, with the other keynote speaker, to kick off some of the concepts around enhancing management and collaboration beyond forest boundaries. Next. Well, actually, I have this slide control. Forests without boundaries. So we want to have a dialogue with you today around 3 topics. A systematic look at forest systems, a few words about human nature, showcasing some unbounded forest innovations, and finish with a few concluding remarks. Next. So what are these boundaries we're talking about? Well, there are natural boundaries that are obviously real. And there are human boundaries that are both real and imagined. But equally important, click please, equally important are the interdependencies of forest systems with other systems, the financial systems, the water systems, the social systems, etc. Next. But we also have boundaries in our thinking, in our conceptualization. And if we look on the right-hand side of this diagram under segregate, this is about how we organize forest and agriculture in ministries, in sectors, in decisions, in international congresses. Whereas the actual landscape looks much more like on the left-hand side, where we integrate those different land uses. And obviously the length of boundaries and opportunities for interactions amongst those is far greater on the left. Next. Now, it doesn't matter if it's a biological system, a financial system, or a computer system, or a social system. All systems have 8 components, 8 common components: inputs, outputs, processes, controls, feedback, interfaces, boundaries, and an external context, external environment. And yet when you look at all of those analyses of systems and call for systems transformation, they're very shy on highlighting these 8 common features. How many times have we heard we've got to fix, we've got to transform, we've got to better understand the system without a full comprehensive portrayal of that system? Next. So, question to all of us, is situating forest as the prime objective the best way to manage forests and increase collaboration? Likely not. Next. Or is it situating forests at the center of everything else the best way to increase collaboration and manage forests? Again, likely not. Next. Sorry, next. And when we look at the complexities and interdependencies and synergies and trade-offs between those other major systems that we see out there in our landscapes, this is how we've got to frame the way we situate and position and promote our forestry beyond our own boundaries and beyond our own thinking. Next. And so our suggestion to you is to conceive of that as a land and a resource management system where forests play a part, but are not paramount to other things, nor subordinate to other things. Next. So last year in Glasgow in November was the world's the world's most significant ever announcement on forests. There's never been a more important or significant announcement than last November. And it was significant because 141 nations signed up to it. How many signed up to the New York Declaration on Forests? 42. And now we've got 141. And not only have we got the signatories and declarations, we've got the resources, the commitment to mobilize $20 billion. It's not a lot, but it's a great start. Next. And that declaration was around these 6 key efforts: conserving forests, trade and development policies, enhancing rural livelihoods, redesigning agricultural policies, significantly increasing finance, and financial flows with international goals. Next. But what was clear to many in Glasgow was 26 COPs without as much progress as is needed. With the urgency of climate change, we've got to do much more. And one of the ways of doing much more is to think not just at the negotiated country level, but corporates and individuals having their own contributions as well. And finance, as you can see, is very important there. Next. And linking that finance up to investments in changes. Now, this is a study in 4 countries in East Africa to show you the significance of investing in soil organic carbon. And what you can see from that diagram is that those farms that have higher soil organic carbon have less erosion and are more likely to be food secure. It's clear. And that is a tremendous investment to make, and the best way to make that is with trees. Next. To our second topic, human nature and humans in nature. And the diagram you can see there is looking at a forest biodiversity suitability. So framing the area and suitability against habitat, combining land resources, land use, and land users. And it was great also to see in Glasgow the FACT dialogue, forest, agricultural, commodities and trade, to try and weave in those landscapes without those hard and fast boundaries as you see in that diagram. Next. So we're seeking to maximize agricultural productivity, as SDG 2 tells us. But can we continue with fertilizer subsidies whilst degrading land? Remember, 2/3 of all agricultural arable land in Africa is degraded. 2/3. And the solution is not to keep pumping in fertilizer, as was seen here for decades in Malawi. And when we think that it takes 8 megawatts of energy to produce 1 ton of fertilizer through the amazing Bosch process, but we, with the war in Ukraine, have been reminded that we are spending too much money on our food production. Next. And the amazing report, the True Cost report in 2015, highlighted that for us. Click. And what it showed us was that it cost us 1.7 times more than the return that we got from agricultural crops. Yeah, we're losing money farming this planet, losing money. But it's just that there's a whole lot of hidden externalities that we don't like to factor into the balance sheet. So we don't recognize it per se. And livestock similarly with 1.3 times. And that is unsustainable. Next. And so TEEB, the Economics of Ecosystems and Biodiversity, led by UNEP, is showing us how we can start to factor in the value of those natural assets. Next. And because it's been clear that human nature is put humans before nature. And we can no longer continue doing that. We're mortgaging away the future of our own grandchildren. We're using up the resources of this world unsustainably. Next. And let's take carbon as an example, the real price of carbon. I don't know if you know, but it is the most variable commodity that we have. The same element, carbon, C12, has a huge range in price. Next. At one end, it's $60 a ton as firewood. Next. And at the other end, $100 billion a ton as diamond. Next. And we were unhappy with that range So we said, well, let's extend it a bit more and create something called atmospheric carbon market. Next. And next. So tropical timber varies in price from $10,000 to $3,500 a cubic meter. Why would we sell it just for $2 to $10 a cubic meter? It's not worth it in terms of the value of the wood, and yet people have incorrectly associated the value of forests as the value of carbon inside of them. Next. So just to really bring that point home, let's think about carbon and oil. 1 barrel of oil is about almost 160 liters. We know its specific gravity, we know its carbon content. Next. And therefore, 1 barrel of oil contains about 420 kilograms of CO2. And at $10 a ton, that's $4.22. Next. So even the most adept salesmen and saleswomen in the audience would struggle if we went to Russia or Saudi Arabia or USA and said, wow, have we got a deal for you? It's just like the forest deal in carbon we had with those foresters. If you agree to extract, to refine, and lock away your oil in a warehouse for 100 years, we'll pay you $4.22 a barrel. Well, actually, there might be some MRV costs, but you get something. You get more than $1. And then we can obviously report that as great success towards the SDGs. Nonsense. So when we look to those SDGs, there's only one that is explicit in the targets, the 169 targets around forestry, 15.2. And so how can we think that we're going to stay bounded within our own forest boundaries if we're not interacting with those targets, the other 168 targets in the other 16 SDGs? Next. And particularly, as you saw in that previous slide, the importance of finance, which is what led C4ICRAF, our own organization, and Thomas, you promised me I was allowed one advertisement. So for C4ICRAF, we created resilient landscapes to connect knowledge and science and our competencies with the private sector corporates and the private sector investors to bring that knowledge to the fore. Next. And we're also pleased to be engaged with the G20, and we designed a 10-year strategy and a 3-year operational plan for the new global initiative on reducing land degradation and enhancing conservation of terrestrial habitats. And you can see why in that early systematic review, we were thinking, let's frame forestry within that land use context. Next. And I credit Ravi Prabhu and colleagues for helping us frame this around a land stewardship approach and a land stewardship economy. Because here, combining land and people and land and nature will help us connect to other sectors, to other systems, to other cycles. Next. So 5 years ago, we would have shown you a graph like this in terms of deforestation. This is a classified forest in Côte d'Ivoire, about 100,000 hectares in area. It's lost 90% of its forest cover over those 20-year time frame in that slide. Devastating. And we're not going to get that forest back as it is. Next. And 2 or 3 years ago, we would have shown you a slimmer slide, but this one has a bit of paint by numbers magic to it. And on the left-hand side, you can see, well, what year did that deforestation occur? And when you put that into a histogram, you can see, well, actually, most of it was after 2008. And 2008 is significant because that is when most of the corporate entities who have announced deforestation-free supply chains as their cutoff year announced it. But they announced it before this analysis. And so that, taking it to another level, was really important. Next. But as of last year, we have a more enhanced and sophisticated way of portraying that to you, and that is by looking at the variation, pixel by pixel, between locations, within a location, and during the year, that phenological, that change in the vegetative index throughout the year. So it's called anomalies in vegetation. And what it enables us to do is to mimic the dynamics of forest growth much more than reporting a single forest disturbance or a single regrowth event. Next. And one of the places we developed those algorithms was in Peru, and you can see here 2004, quite a well-forested landscape. Next. And 15 years later, you can see in the top left-hand corner, oil palm plantation coming in, and on the bottom right, much more smallholder agricultural systems. Next. So if you look to the right of that slide, again, we show you the paint by numbers approach. When was it deforested? But if you look at the white bar at the top, we show you the dynamics of that particular pixel, that single Landsat pixel of when it was a forest and deforested and back to a forest and deforested and back to a forest. So that we get a much more nuanced approach to the conservation and how that whole landscape mosaic is interacting with that forest. Next. So we wanted to showcase a few forest innovations with you. Time is winding up. Three, one in Sub-Saharan Africa, one in Andhra Pradesh, and one in Papua New Guinea. Next. So Sub-Saharan Africa, there's a website there for you to look at. This is an amazing project looking in 8 countries at regreening Africa with trees. It's seeking to restore 1 million hectares of land over 5 years with 500,000 households. Next. Another project in Andhra Pradesh in India looking to scale up the success that was held in 130 village clusters to now over 600,000 farmers across the state and wanting to expand that up to 2 million farmers in the state of Andhra Pradesh. Next. But very quickly, I want to run through a last project in Papua New Guinea, an exciting project, and you're going to have to look at most of these slides online because Thomas is going to prod me if I go over my time too much. But it's an exciting new project, 360,000 hectares. It's in an area, the largest conservation area in Papua New Guinea. Papua New Guinea is this amazing country that has 75% forest cover. It has 97% of its land owned by indigenous people, the largest in the world ever. It has 0.1% of the world's land area, but 7% of the world's terrestrial biodiversity. Next. So this amazing, intact, pristine forest, as well as this multiple use areas where there is logging and there's some cultivation and hunting as well. Next. These are traditional communities that are looking to modernize and develop and grow, but without losing their very, very strong social connections and bonds. Next. And so our first exercise is to look at the land use and the land users in those. And having categorized and plotted and planned those areas with those communities about what they want to do in the mixed use forest areas. Next. To frame that against individual benefits to farmers and benefits to the communities. And not just for $10 a ton carbon, but for $80 a ton carbon. Carbon that bundles together biodiversity, watershed protection, preventing land degradation, preventing deforestation, enhancing social cohesion. And through this approach, approximately 3/4 of the benefit will come back to the communities rather than to individual landholders. Next. And in terms of biodiversity, and this is the real tricky part, we can measure carbon, we can measure water in cubic meters. How do we measure biodiversity? When we have these 3 elements of the functioning ecosystem, species richness and diversity, and intra-specific variation, all bundled together. Next. So we're going to use this We're going to use this new project in Papua New Guinea in these areas, even where there's no mobile phone networks, using just offline apps with an accuracy of 1 meter to take photographs that are time-stamped, date-stamped, to give investors and off-takers and communities and monitors assurance of what is going on there. And we have 500 enumerators, young enumerators in this project that live in the villages, so the youth are getting involved in taking these new technologies to help in this process. Next. And we believe what is important is not a single index, but 2 things. One is the relative biodiversity, and the other is the threat. And not to report a single number, but a vector. What's the direction and travel? Because investors and countries and others want to know, well, is my project or my investment or my enterprise going to be neutral on biodiversity, going to enhance it, or going to degrade it? And that is tangible. And it can even be a traffic light system on foodstuffs. Next. And lastly, Thomas, how could we not think about the boundaries even within the custodians of the forest, the humans? And unless we seek that equity and that equality with women's groups and youth groups, we will not get the progress that we seek in better management or better collaboration in forests. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Tony. This was, I think, to set the stage, an absolutely wonderful presentation, as usual, from you, Tony. And you managed to really bring the forestry dimension into many, many aspects beyond forestry, economic aspects, social aspects, green infrastructure aspects, and so on. So a huge amount of food for thought, but I think because of the time we have started a bit late the session, we have to immediately continue in our program. And I would like to introduce our second keynote speaker, Frank Riesberman, who unfortunately is not being able to join us physically today, but he should be online. Frank, are you there? Just to check. Hello, Frank, are you there?
Yes, and I'm speaking, but maybe
Okay.
I'm not turned on yet, yes.
Good, good, good. So Dr. Frank leads the Global Green Growth Institute, GGGI, in supporting governments' transition towards a model of economic growth that is environmentally sustainable and socially inclusive. With over 30 years' experience addressing the challenges of environmental sustainability and poverty reduction with leading international organizations and philanthropic foundations, Dr. Riesberman was initially appointed as the Director General of the Institute in October 1st, 2016, and reappointed for a second term starting October 2020. In his role, Frank engages with senior international stakeholders to drive the green growth agenda and help mobilize finance for climate action and sustainable development. Frank holds a PhD degree in water resources management and planning from Colorado State University and an MSc and BSc in civil engineering from Delft University of Technology in the Netherlands. Frank, you have the floor for your 15 minutes keynote. Thank you for being with us. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Thomas, for that kind introduction, and apologies that I could not be with you. I am in Seoul, but I was given a positive PCR test this morning, so I'm afraid I had to leave the hall and quarantine. But I'm happy to speak to you on somewhat the same subject as my former colleague, Tony Simons, but focusing on international collaboration, if you like, practical aspects of implementing a number of the things that were raised by many of the earlier speakers today. Can we start with maybe the first slide? Indeed, so a very brief introduction of GGGI. If you don't know it, still a young intergovernmental organization, only about 10 years old. We now have 43 member countries who ratified our treaty, and we support them to accelerate their green transition, both through policy work and through indeed mobilizing green and climate finance. You'll see that we're not a forest organization. We do work on sustainable landscapes, and a large part of that work is indeed directly linked to forest. Next. So here you see our network of countries. A bit special is that GGGI, while we have our headquarters here in Seoul, have about 3/4 of our staff in about 35 countries, embedded in country governments, ministries of environment, forests sometimes, ministries of planning, ministries of finance that we advise. Next. So as I think you've heard many times already, just now from Tony as well, trees have become a key part of international meetings, not just the forest meetings, but particularly the climate meetings. And the summary of the 4 priorities as Prime Minister Boris Johnson, the host of COP26, summarized it was that COP26 was about coal, cars, cash, and trees. So yes, trees have become a key part of climate discussions, although in the about 30 countries that GGI supported in making more explicit, more ambitious, nationally determined contributions to the Paris Agreement. Only about 14 of those countries explicitly had forest targets in their NDCs. So there is still quite a bit of progress to make. Next. But yes, as Tony already mentioned, you could say that Glasgow COP26 was the moment where forests took center stage, with 141 leaders committing to halt and reverse forest loss and land degradation by 2030. That's, of course, an enormous statement, given that so far, despite earlier commitments, forest loss and land degradation has only accelerated rather than been reversed. To do that within 8 years is a very, very big agenda and will require the efforts of many of us, if not all of us, and a lot of international collaboration. So if we look in the remainder of this presentation, I'll try to give you a lot of examples of how that could occur and is occurring. Next. So beyond the statement of the leaders on forest, there was a lot of attention in COP26 for nature-based solutions. While COP26 was maybe the first COP where this was so prominent, there have been earlier reports, for instance this one from the Nature Conservancy and a number of scientists, that demonstrated that nature-based solutions or natural climate solutions are indeed a critical part of the solution. Not only are forests a key source of greenhouse gas emissions, so forest can also be a key mitigation pathway. As you see here in the list of natural climate solutions, reforestation of forest, avoided forest conversion, natural forest management, all of these are clear forest solutions. Next. So what do nature-based solutions mean? For GDGI, I'm just summarizing here on one slide a proposal that we've put together with a number of our member countries, and nature-based solutions, in our view, for Africa, are ideally some integrated combination of, yes, forest restoration and protection, but most likely combined with establishing plantation forest to partly relieve the pressure on natural forests, and also a key component of agroforestry integrated in climate-smart agriculture. And on top of that, that might not be as obvious to you, indeed, including nature-based solutions in urban and peri-urban areas, or what some people call trees outside forests. And I noted in the KFS minister's introduction this morning that for Korea, nature-based solutions in urban and peri-urban areas, trees in forests are a key part of the solution as well. So I think for many actors, while the definitions of nature-based solutions are not all that clear, it often means some form of these four key elements. Next. Another critical moment in Glasgow was that the conference agreed on the rules for Article 6. That was the last part of the rule book that had not been completed. And even though I noted that Tony Simons just now wasn't exactly positive about carbon trading, we believe that there are many opportunities for a new form of the carbon market. You could say that the first carbon market based on the Kyoto Protocol was quite disappointing for most developing countries, as they did not exactly have access. The new carbon market will have to have much higher prices than the $2 to $10 per ton that Tony mentioned. And indeed, most scientists would say you need at least $100 per ton to make this work. And on national carbon markets, like in Korea, prices are well north of 20 tons, $20 per ton, and likely to go much higher. In short, we believe that while carbon credits for forests are currently still dominated by the voluntary market, in the next few years, formal internationally transferred mitigation outcomes, or ITMOs, under the Paris Agreement are likely to become a key factor in carbon credits related to forest. Next. So can we look at my next slide? I think, yes, another critical element, particularly today when many countries are looking at the green recovery from the pandemic, is to talk about jobs, not only about carbon, but to talk about jobs. And GDGI analyzed the green jobs related to the NDC targets in GDGI member countries. We could analyze that in close to 30 countries. And while most of those NDCs only talk about the amount of greenhouse gas emissions that can be reduced through their NDCs, almost none of them talk about the jobs created at the same time if those NDCs are implemented. So we analyzed those, both for renewable energy and for forests. Next slide. You'll see that in those 27 GDGI member countries that had quantifiable NDC energy targets, implementing them would also generate some 10 million job years. That is quite significant, even though fewer of those are linked to explicit solar or wind energy, and more of them are linked to the blue hydropower. This is partly because for a number of countries, renewable energy is not linked to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but rather to increasing energy access, which would create a lot of jobs on top of these in the countries with low NDC targets for renewable energy. Interesting though for you as a forest interested audience, in the next slide, you'll see that next, even though only 14 GDGI members had quantifiable forest-related targets in their NDCs, implementing those targets would lead to an even higher number of some 35 million job years. And the argument I'm trying to advance to you is that, as for many governments, creating jobs right now is a critical priority. They don't often think of combining climate action with generating those green jobs, while there is in fact a very significant opportunity here, linked to renewable energy, but as you can see here, at least as much or maybe more linked to forests. Next slide. So what does this mean in practice? I'd like to give you some examples from Indonesia, where GDGI is working very closely with the government to reduce deforestation and degradation of forests and peatlands, particularly. Next. And that links to indeed green policy making. Effective policies and plans to reduce deforestation and peatland degradation have to be a critical part of any enabling environment before you can get around to investment mobilization. And there we find that there are many sources of money, and what is often the scarcity is well-developed, bankable projects. So developing investment plans and project pipelines can indeed generate funds. And of course, that has to be linked to knowledge sharing and capacity building at the same time. Next slide. In Indonesia, for instance, you see that we've worked with government on a number of projects leading to investments in forests that range from a RED Plus project that generates results-based payments to working with sustainable coconut and palm sugar production with TLLF. Quite different projects, but all generating funds to implement more sustainable forest management. Next slide. You'll see that that is embedded, if you like, in a larger landscape of Green Climate Fund projects. Not all of them linked to forest, but quite a few of them are. And while the Green Climate Fund is not the fastest way, it is one of the, if you like, best sources of climate finance available. Often, the opportunity for such funds are that they can be blended with private sector investments to leverage these relatively scarce funds. Next slide. So what are the specific activities underneath the hood, so to speak? And particularly if you start to look at peatlands and mangroves, some key ecosystems in Indonesia, then actually developing carbon accounting for mangroves or integrating peatlands and mangroves into the NDC mitigation roadmaps are some of the concrete nuts and bolts, if you like, for the collaboration that then later are a good foundation for coming up with such bankable investment projects. Next slide. So what this means in practice is that GGI worked closely with the provincial government in East Kalimantan to develop a jurisdictional emission reduction program that over a number of years, these are not exactly fast processes, then yielded results-based payments from funds held in the World Bank, a bit more than $100 million for the Indonesian government, combined with funds from the Indonesian government itself. Next slide. Taking quite a different approach, and I've put this project in this presentation because it is one where GGI is actually working together with ICRAF, Tony Simon's institution that you just heard. This is an idea that ICRAF has worked on for a long time. Peru actually has a law that allows farmers that occupy state land to get an agroforestry concession. That law is about 10 years old and has not really been taken up. It's not used by farmers. So through international cooperation, next slide, we now have a project funded by Norway in which SPIDA, a local legal environmental organization, ICRAF and GGI, work to operationalize this law, to demonstrate that it is in farmers' interest to take advantage of this opportunity, and that in the end, if fully taken up, could lead to about 120,000 vulnerable smallholders families that occupy over 1 million hectares to become, rather than practicing shifting cultivation and deforesting, stewards of the landscape. Next slide. So the intent is that through these opportunities, through these agroforestry concession opportunities, there is a formalization of land, not ownership, but title, and that then indeed integrates plantation, agroforestry, and climate-smart agriculture in the same area, and indeed promoting sustainable practices and contributing to mitigation greenhouse gas emissions as well. Next slide. Colombia is another country where we've worked for a long time, and that demonstrates a number of these different features of international collaboration that are relevant for many forest countries. Developing a forest economy, coming up with ways to generate income through nature-based tourism, making cattle ranching more sustainable, and of course combined with forms of deforestation control. Next slide. So over a number of years, how international cooperation generates funding for Colombia's government to work on these areas is demonstrated here from joint declarations of intent between Colombia, Germany, Norway, and the UK some time back that generated the first $150 million results-based payments through, as you see here, a number of follow-up actions, both actions from the Colombian government, adopting a national green growth plan, adopting a national bioeconomy policy, and in tandem, a number of commitments from international partners to release additional amounts of funding for, if you like, the Colombian government to implement those policies. Next slide. So that does lead to working on deforestation control directly, linked to climate change, putting in place those MRVs, all these subjects that we are discussing here in the conference in practice. But at the same time, working on sustainable livestock management, one of the key drivers of deforestation in Colombia. Next slide. And working on the forest economy and nature-based tourism as alternatives to the deforestation and unsustainable use of livestock that were the key drivers of deforestation in Colombia. Next slide. So before coming to my final slide, I did want to put in a couple projects that we are working on with KFS, our host in the in the conference, because KFS has started a program on people, peace and prosperity, the Peace Forest program. And one of those projects that the GGI is collaborating on is in Ethiopia, working on improving coffee agroforestry through, as you can see here, a range of activities. Next slide. Let's start with nurseries that work all the way up to working on coffee value chains and giving Ethiopian coffee farmers access to value chains that end up in the coffee shops here in Seoul that you may be drinking your coffee from. Next slide. We're similarly discussing with KFS a proposal to strengthen value chains on karité or the shea value chain. That is a key part of a number of countries in West Africa, from Ghana to Togo and several others. We believe that these indeed are real opportunities for international collaboration, not only to work on forestry, but of course to work directly with the people living in those forests, the women and youth living on shea trade products, and can be the direct beneficiaries from improved value chain management. My final slide shows you a few conclusions. Yes, it starts with that key moment in Glasgow where leaders made that major commitment. Although I would say that while there are some slides, as Tony showed, of the key areas that will be in that agenda, I think this is a real challenge to all of us to come up with actions that can be implemented. And indeed, nature-based climate solutions are definitely an opportunity to link forestry with climate. And yes, I believe that has to be some form of combining forest conservation with plantations, agroforestry, climate-smart agriculture, and even urban nature-based solutions. Finally, I think I am more optimistic that Article 6, ITMOs, can be a real opportunity in years to come than Tony was. I don't think that that is going to necessarily be a direct means to convince oil-producing countries to leave those tons in the soil, if you like. But they are opportunities to strengthen good forest projects to, in a way, generate additional income to make them feasible. I thank you for your attention, and I give it back to you, Thomas, I think within my time.
Thank you very much, Frank, for this excellent presentation. And I think it was extremely complementary to what Tony was talking about. Again, bringing forestry far beyond the forestry sector, and you obviously highlighted very much the economic potential, in fact, we have, be it with climate finance or other means of bringing benefits from forest economy, including job creation and so on, and your excellent examples from the field. Frank, we hope that COVID is not treating you too strongly, so we hope you are getting through this very fast and you can still follow the conference from during your quarantine. So thank you for having been with us and for having shared this excellent insight with us. Thank you, Frank. Now, we are coming to the second part of our session today, and we face a little bit the challenge because we started late and time is running very fast, and we need to also respect that there are side events coming very soon. So we have here a distinguished panel, and I asked the panelists, in fact, to spend 3, 4, 5 minutes reflecting from their perspective what they have heard from Tony and from Frank. But the challenge is that they didn't know what they are talking about. But that's why these panelists are very senior. They can deal with it. So I asked the panelists also not to make presentations, but to really make a few very powerful statements. So I would like to start with Magdalena. You heard Magdalena already this morning with an excellent youth presentation in the opening ceremony. Magdalena Jovanovic is an undergraduate studying forestry at the University of Belgrade. Magdalena is actively involved in the international forestry field and is an active member of the International Forestry Students Association, where she currently is serving as the president. In her role, she represents IFSA and advocates for youth in many important events and initiatives, as well as communicates with partner organizations and processes. Before her tenure as the president, Magdalena served as the head of the European Forest Institute subcommission of IFSA. So Magdalena, what are your thoughts from the youth perspective about what you heard from these two keynote presenters in the context of collaboration, partnerships, etc.? The floor is yours, Magdalena.
Thank you, Tony. Can you hear me? Hello? Yes. Yeah. Thank you, Tony. So actually, I would like to start by talking about the topic of this very session, which is forests beyond forestry. And when we talk about the youth perspective, we have to really consider what does this concept mean to young people. And the way we understand this is that as the society evolves and the demands of the society are growing and changing, the forestry sector alongside that has to evolve in order to adapt. So we have to think about how can we expand the scope of forestry itself. And this means that we have to change the way we think about forestry, and we have to look beyond the economical aspects of forestry, but instead look at what forestry can be. And how can we then include all of the processes and all of the services that depend on forests in any form, and how can we avoid conflicts that can arise from all of these different demands that are now growing. So this is why one of the topics of this session is also landscape management. And landscape management, of course, can be key for ensuring that we have forests that are managed in a way that can satisfy all of these ecosystem services, but also that we preserve sustainable and resilient forests for the future. And this would mean shifting towards more inclusive management. And here we come to collaboration. How can we include all of the different sectors that are impacted by forests in any way, and how can we have collaboration between all of these sectors? Because I think in the long run, the task of fulfilling all of these demands of society is not going to fall only on the forestry sector, but the solution is going to be collaborative action within all of these sectors. And we know that forestry is a very, very long process, and the decisions that we take now will only take effect in future generations. And for young people, I think what is really important is that we look beyond the 2030 agenda, because 2030 is just around the corner. It's only in 8 years. So for us, it's important to look at what comes next, and how can we use this, what is being done now, how can we use this as a baseline and as a starting point for when we are the ones that are running the forestry sector. And you might be wondering, where does youth come into all of this? Well, youth organizations such as IFSA have also been taking actions of our own to contribute to the 2030 agenda, because, as I said, it's important that we leave a good basis for ourselves. And we have been working on developing learning platforms to contribute to our own quality educations. We have been active in climate discussions, and of course, through all of our events, we aim to raise awareness about for all aspects of forestry. But I think what we really need as young people is better infrastructure, and to really better reflect all of the aspects that we are talking here in this session today, and that is landscape management and collaboration and inclusivity. And how can we really reflect this better in forestry education and better prepare young people for their future career? And lastly, I would like to say that we need to remember that when we speak about the future of the forestry sector, that we also speak about our future, the future of young people. And it is not only necessary to cooperate between sectors, but it is really necessary to enforce intergenerational cooperation and to really value the input of young people in order to reach the common goals, of course. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Magdalena. And, you know, listening to you and to many other young people we are working with makes me very optimistic about the future, because the way you think, the way you see forestry beyond forestry, but overall, you know, how you want to engage in improving, in moving the way in the right, in the world in the right direction makes me very optimistic. So please continue to do this work and raise your voice. Thank you, Magdalena. John Parotta is the National Research Program Leader for International Science Issues with the US Department of Forest Service, and currently the President of the International Union of Forestry Research Organizations, IUFRO. He earned his PhD from Yale University in 1987 and has conducted research in Puerto Rico, Brazil, and India on tropical forest restoration, silviculture, and traditional forest-related knowledge. He's the author of nearly 200 scientific publications and a member of the editorial boards of several international forestry science journals. So, John, your thoughts from the more scientific or research perspective, but also from your government experience about collaboration. You have the floor.
Thank you, Thomas. Yeah, I know we're short of time, so I'll try to be, I will be very brief. The keynote talks were excellent, and in fact, they said many of the things that I would have wanted to say, particularly Tony, who's, of course, a superb scientist and actually stole my thunder on a number of points I wanted to make. But in general terms, I think the role of forest science is, in the context of this discussion today, is to refine our understanding of the full range of contributions that forests make in terms of ecosystem services to people living across landscapes who aren't necessarily dependent on the forest sector, but who nonetheless benefit from forests, whether they're in agriculture or even living in urban areas. I think there's, of course, a lot of research that goes into various aspects of that. Until recently, most of our work was inward looking to the forest, but I think in recent years we're seeing a much greater emphasis on how forests and forest management intersects with agriculture, with water issues, with other aspects of human well-being, human health, livable cities, and some of the other SDGs. So this is very promising, because we really do need a deeper understanding of these relationships if we're to ultimately get across the message of the importance of forests to decision makers and to the general public, and whose decisions they make in their own lifestyles, what they eat, how they consume resources, who they vote for. I think these it's a very important audience that needs to understand the true values of forests. Forest science is also has a very important role to play in evaluating the inevitable trade-offs that we have among the various and how forest management influences the provision of different ecosystem services, what the trade-offs are, and how these intersect with a more complex socio-economic environment in which these forests are found. So there's a lot of complexity in this that requires a depth of knowledge, both from the biophysical sciences, but probably more importantly from the social sciences, because the evaluation and the better understanding of power relations within landscapes, the importance of tenure and governance systems, these are all very critical elements that need to be understood. And finally, just building on what one of the topics that Tony brought up is the role of the scientific community in the development of improved methods for full valuation of forest ecosystem services. There's been some very good work done, particularly over the last 15 years, following the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, but this work really does need to expand, because we're not going to adequately account for the true value of forests if we're just talking about carbon or even water. You know, we really have to expand our methodologies and our communication of what we find through these methodologies regarding a whole range of ecosystem services that can be not just economic, they're social, cultural. I think these kinds of developments in the science community can really help us, you know, pull all of this together and be better, and just help us level the current playing field, which is heavily tilted against forest conservation and sustainable management. So with that, I'll finish. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much, and it's great to see how much IUFRO, in fact, in its work, in its research work, is really expanding into sectors, you know, to really bring forestry into other sectors, and especially also, obviously, from research side and what you just said, from communication side, etc. So thank you for that. I just realized that I forgot to introduce myself, that you know who is your moderator here in front of you. So my name is Thomas. I have been working for FAO since 1998. Mostly in headquarters in Rome, but also 2017 to 2021, I was based in Bangkok in the regional office as senior forestry officer, where we had a very, very strong collaboration already with the Korea Forest Service, where we organized in 2019 the 4th Asia-Pacific Forestry Week with a very successful outcome and with a perfect work or preparations done by the Korea Forest Service as we are facing and this time again. So that's very briefly to my introduction. Sorry for that I didn't do it in the beginning. Now, Xiam has quite recently been appointed as the Director General of the International Tropical Timber Organization, ITTO. Xiam is a citizen of Malaysia, was the Malaysian Timber Council's regional director for Europe between 2007 and 2017, and has been director of operations of ITTO since 2017. Xiam is a specialist in international trade with strong skills and experience in legal and policy analysis related to international affairs, the timber and forest industries, communications, public affairs, and outreach. She's also a skilled and experienced international negotiator. She holds a master's degree in law from King's College at the University of London and was called to the English bar in 1993. So Xiam, when you take your legal background, your negotiation skills, what about enhancing collaboration of forestry? Opportunities and hurdles.
Thank you very much for that, Thomas, for your very kind introduction. And also congratulations to the KFS and also this whole panel who are here today. Very distinguished indeed. Thank you to the keynote speakers. You have given us quite a challenge now to actually quickly come up with some points to speak in the very limited time that we have. So I will also do my best to be very brief. So taking into consideration what Tony and Frank have already said, and also two of our panelists have raised today, I will try and avoid repeating those points. What struck me was both our keynote speakers also talked about the global declaration coming out of COP26, and 3 points that appeared at the very top of that list of priorities actually fits the International Tropical Timber Organization's mandate down to the ground. One is conservation of natural resources, which we firmly believe in, sustainable forest management in the tropics. Secondly, facilitation of global trade in these products that come out of sustainably managed products and trade. And finally, financing. 3 things. And for everything that we have articulated, or the keynote speakers have articulated this afternoon, what lies at the bottom of that, of course, is sustainable financing. Sustainable financing is the only way through which aims and objectives can be mutually achieved. And from what we have seen, and through my experience in the field for nearly 30 years, is that much of what Tony had in his keynote presentation in terms of the landscape approach and mosaicing is already happening in a number of countries around the world. So the situation is quite acute, yes. Yes, it is acute. We only have 8 years if we are to do and change things but things have already changed in the last 2 decades. So what I would urge is let's not panic. Let's just sit down and consolidate and move forward in a coherent way. Human nature was talked about, and unfortunately, human nature is such. When something new comes along, they forget what is meant to be worked on and what is meant to have been improved on. Forgive me for being so frank, but if human nature and the global community had been a little bit more serious on the conservation and sustainable use of natural resources in the last 2 decades, perhaps we would not be in the predicament that we are in today. Like I said, I'm sorry for being so frank, but that is indeed a fact. And I couldn't be more happy and I couldn't be more proud to say that ITTO perfectly corresponds and we fully subscribe to the landscape approach. We also fully subscribe to mosaicing and mixing and matching. So in terms of moving forward, again, I couldn't agree more because we have been articulating and advocating this for the last 5 years, even more, that we do need a cross-sectoral approach. In other words, forget the silo approach. So it's not just the agricultural sector and forestry sector that needs to work together. Let's not forget the mining sector. This is more in terms of relevance to tropical forestry. As we all know, the tropical forest ecosystems are the most vulnerable and the most gullible at this time that we are speaking. And in order to make it viable for the future, they need to return social protection, economic gain, and also environmental protection. Without these 3 key elements, it will be almost impossible, if not extremely difficult, to reach the goals of the 2030. Now, to put it very, very quickly, in terms of the bioeconomy, fully agree again, we need to move towards the circular economy. And this is where sustainable production and consumption falls into that neat pattern that all of us need to subscribe to. The forest economy indeed is a key sector for green jobs. But when we talk about green jobs, we also need to talk about sustainable green jobs, sustainable growth, sustainable income, sustainable revenue, sustainable investments. Without that cycle, we are again disjointed and disgruntled. As you know, tropical forests are the mega diverse hotspots. And that is the reason why we need coherence in our approach on advocacy, communications, and outreach in order to manage this knowledge management and knowledge sharing. That in return will provide capacity building and training. Education is a key factor. And again, I couldn't agree more again with the intergenerational support, because as we know, skilled technical people are becoming rather endangered, particularly in the forestry sector. Why? Because the forestry sector has become more and more unattractive. It needs to become more and more attractive. So from what the youth sector have said and the women, empowerment of women and local communities and indigenous peoples, all this will add to the value of forests being central, as it should be, in climate change mitigation and adaptation. In terms of international collaboration, there is plenty to be discussed here to avoid duplication of efforts. And thanks so much to Frank for actually talking about the projects that the GGGI are doing. A lot of that trickles back to the projects that ITTO has been implementing in the 35 years of this organization's existence. ITTO has implemented more than 1,200 projects on the ground in tropical countries, worth to almost $400 million over 36 years. That's nothing, actually. So it tells you that the projects that ITTO has implemented are reasonably small, and many of them were scaled up and particularly taken over by the GEF and the World Bank to the tune of a few $100 million in various parts of the world. So what I wish to assert here is please don't forget the practical, really implementable projects that can be scalable, and please don't forget small international organizations like the International Tropical Timber Organization that can make a difference. And I think I will just stop there so that other panelists have a chance to speak. Thank you so much. Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you, Shyam. Very, very powerful and clear statements as usual, and I very much like your call that we should be coherent when we move forward. I think that's a very important message. Colleagues, I hope you will still be with us if we can extend by 15 minutes because our program is still not finished. Our fourth panelist, Stéphane Allaire, created Reforest Action to enable companies and citizens to take concrete action for forest and climate. He's the founder of the crowd planting concept and brings the voice of the forest to public and private international leaders. As the co-initiator of the Global Forest Summit, he aims to strengthen the global multi-stakeholder dialogue for forest protection and restoration. Alongside the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, Stéphane wants to create a generation of reforestation entrepreneurs to empower citizens around the world to create revenues by restoring their environment and developing a bio-circular economy. He's the coordinator of the Circular Bioeconomy Alliance Living Labs. So Stéphane, you wanted to brief us about Global Forest Summit recently held and what that indicates for collaboration for the topic we are discussing today. Stéphane, you have the floor.
Thank you, Thomas. Yes, and I would like to react as you invited us on what has been said by the speakers at the beginning of this session. We've been reminded the positive impact that forests have on all of us, the importance of forest and how to protect, restore and sustainably manage this forest. Now, Reforest Action, I created Reforest Action 12 years ago because what we've been told today is not new news. We've been saying that, or a number of you guys have been saying that for a number of years. What is new news is the numbers, maybe. The progress or the lack of progress we're making. And in a very humble way, I wanted to contribute to the global effort by creating Reforest Action. Now, what we want to focus on at Reforest Action is to make it our own way, which is focusing on the circular bioeconomy. Because we believe that if forests don't deliver economic services and economic benefits, sustainable value chains for local populations, their sustainability is at stake. So we joined the Circular Bioeconomy Alliance a couple of years ago to promote this bioeconomy on every project we run. And although we are quite successful in implementing carbon projects and sustainable value chains in a number of countries, we still don't reach the targets that we've given us, which is zero deforestation, which is 350 million hectares to be restored, and to increase sustainable management in forest. So back in 2021, Thomas, we decided to co-create with the Open Diplomacy Institute, a Paris-based think tank. We decided to create the Global Forest Summit with a specific goal, which is to monitor on a yearly basis the progress or the lack of progress we make to reach the objectives we've set up. And this Global Forest Summit involves a number of people here, and Tina, for instance, from the FAO, which I thank very much for inviting me at this session today, but also His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales, John Kerry, the Special Envoy for Climate for the US, Gillette Bao as well, and project holders, companies, NGOs, and the European Commissions, and so on. During this Global Forest Summit, what we aim at doing is highlighting what goes wrong and what goes right, and putting in the same room at the same time corporate leaders, project developers on the ground, and the institutions that help linking the dots. And out of this day, the second session happened last 24th of March, a bit more than a month ago. And we came with four highlights. The first one is we don't know how to measure progress against the objectives on a yearly basis. We don't have a yearly set of indicators that we can track and monitor up until 2030. The second one is if we want to reach zero deforestation in setting which is carbon finance within the value chains of companies is probably a very good way to achieve this zero deforestation. It's not the only way, obviously, but it's a very good opportunity. The third thing is we need to scale circular bioeconomy. If circular bioeconomy is not linked to forest restoration, then forest may not last because they will not provide the incomes to the local communities. And finally, we need to raise big money. We need to make it times by 4 between now and 2030. And carbon offsetting is a good way to collect money for forest preservation, restoration, and sustainable management, but it cannot be linked to companies that continue emitting carbon emissions while offsetting their carbon emissions. So we need to set up a set of, we need to be very careful with whom we work, with which corporates we work when we offset carbon emissions. So Thomas, maybe to conclude, the Global Forest Summit aims at measuring the impact we have on a yearly basis, and we need scientists, we need you to help us doing that. And it's also to challenge decision makers and to create the conditions to go faster and in achieving the goals we all wish.
Thank you, Stefan, and congratulations for this very important initiative, and we wish you best of success, and we look forward to collaboration, more collaboration in future with you, and very practical also work you are doing. Okay, so we have a last panelist, and she has a pre-recorded statement from IUCN, Adriana Vidal, who is with IUCN since 2015, where she worked with government agencies, partners, and the international global space, advocating for and supporting enhanced policy frameworks for nature-based solutions in forest conservation, restoration, and sustainable landscape management. She leads the international policy work on climate change and biodiversity and provides expert advice for country-level policy influencing strategies and activities. Can we screen her pre-recorded statement? Because Adriana, she was supposed to be here, but she's still on travel because one of her correcting flights was cancelled. So she sent us a pre-recorded statement. Can we have that statement? Is it available? Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. Hello to everybody. I am truly sorry I can't be there in person for this session and hope to join you all in Seoul very soon. Thank you for allowing me to share some reflections in the opening session of this sub-theme 6. We have heard from the keynote presentations some important reflections on systemic change needed, raising the place of forests and nature not only as something that we can benefit from, but something that we need to safeguard for our own survival. But it is not one or the other. It is a matter of making conservation, restoration, and sustainable management part of the economic and financial decisions. How to achieve this? Here are some thoughts. First, invest in base farmer organizations. Invest in reinforcing their internal governance, which then will help them to be a more effective actor in decision-making processes. Second, again, focusing on local farmers' organizations. Focus on empowering organizations and leaders to become entrepreneurs, while at the same time create opportunities for local finance and access to markets. Remember that empowerment is one side of the coin, market infrastructure and enabling conditions is the other side. And this is where the other two big actors come into play. The financial risk of degradation, biodiversity loss, and climate change is being accounted for by more and more companies. And addressing those risks through sustainable management under landscape approaches is key. Why? Landscape approaches offer comprehensive, grounded strategies to help regain the many benefits provided by nature, particularly for supply chains, such as carbon sequestration, pollination, soil and water quality improvement, and assuring local climate regulation. Landscape restoration also supports the socio-economic development of smallholders and local communities by offering additional or more diversified revenues. Every dollar, both private and public investment, spent on actions such as ecosystem restoration and conservation could generate between $7 and $30 more in the broader economy. But not all capital or investment decisions will come from the private sector. Public-private partnerships need to facilitate an ecological infrastructure. In forest ecosystems under management, the business case for restoration can be made compelling for private sector investors, hence generating a great opportunity for collaboration. For this to happen, as I said before, as mentioned before in keynote remarks for this session, we need to bring efforts of the many institutions who, by the way, are participating at this Congress, for instance. So we need to create these dialogues, create these opportunities for collaboration, and I am sure that in the next sessions under this sub-theme, all of these topics will be discussed in depth. I'm looking forward to participate in those. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adriana. So we are almost have exhausted our time. We will skip the video we had foreseen for that part of the session because of the time. And I would like to move directly to the last part of our session, which is again a very challenging one because we asked each organizer of the session or a representative of the organizers of sessions 2, 3, 4, and 5 to give us an elevator pitch of what we can expect from their session. So this is important for you who are still in the room, but also for the colleagues who are online with us. So please tell us why your session is the most important thing which has ever happened in a conference. So I think the first is session 2, which is organized by UNEP, C4, and the Stockholm International Water Institute. I hope we have Liz Bernhard online from UNEP. Can we check? Is she online? I don't see her, so maybe we can screen her pre-recorded statement, please. There seems no sound.
Sub-theme 6, Forests Without Borders. Hi, I'm Liz at UNEP, and together with C4 ICRAF and the SIWI Swedish Water House, we are pleased to be co-organizing session number 2 within Sub-theme 6, Forests Without Borders. Session 2 is entitled Forest Water Connections to Achieve the SDGs. Our hybrid event will be taking place on May 3rd from 11 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. Seoul time, and will focus on topics such as improving integration of water in forest management and how to maximize the outputs from the forest-water nexus at different scales and landscapes, from the mountains to the plains and rivers. It will also highlight the importance of the forest-water nexus to achieve the SDGs by showcasing exciting examples from mountain, plains, urban, and coastal areas and ecosystems, which include peatlands, mangroves, and flying rivers. Through these examples, the session will explore questions such as how forests provide water-related benefits, how we should manage them, and what kinds of barriers need to be overcome to advance the forest-water nexus. Our session will end with a call to action on the forest-water nexus. The overall message from our session will be that managing forests for water-related services through inclusive and cross-sectoral collaboration can contribute to achieving the SDGs and to addressing some of the world's major challenges such as climate change and food and water insecurity. We hope to see you there.
Okay, that would be session 2 tomorrow. Next short elevator pitch is Nathalie Foch from Recoft, representing the organizers of session 3. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Thomas. So we will have a session tomorrow, the 3rd of May, tomorrow from 4 to 5:30 p.m. So you're warmly welcome to join our session, which is organized by Recoft together with the International Center for Integrated Mountain Development, ICIMOD, and the Albertine Rift Conservation Society, ARCOS. So our session will cover partnerships with indigenous people and local communities that deliver sustainable forest management in fragile ecosystems, such as mountain areas, drylands, mangroves, and peatlands. We'll be sharing insights from research and practice from all around the world through an interactive session. So we'd like to engage the audience and engage as well both here in Seoul, but also the online audience. The objective of our session will be to discuss challenges, opportunities, and lessons learned for sustainable forest management in fragile ecosystem, with a landscape perspective and a particular focus on indigenous people and local communities. So please join us for this engaging session tomorrow to find out how we work as partners with indigenous and local communities to achieve our global goals. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nathalie. Barbara, over to you.
Thank you very much, Thomas, and thank you for staying. I know it's late. We, the United Nations Foreign on Forest Secretariat, together with our friends and partners, the Asian Forest Cooperation Organization, AFOCO, which is headquartered in Seoul, we are organizing a session this coming Wednesday from 11 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. on partnerships and collaboration for sustainable forest management. We were able to identify and put together some very interesting partnerships that one wouldn't think about when they think about forests. We are looking very much forward to showcase them to you. I would like to tell you the importance of this moment. We are just surviving a pandemic that is not yet over, and we are learning that without a healthy planet, there are no healthy animals and there are no healthy human beings. Everything is linked, everything works well together. So the moment is now to change the way that we deal with nature. Nature can help us. Yes, but also we should help nature if we want to be helped. So please come. It's going to be here in Hall D this coming Wednesday at 11 a.m. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Barbara. And it's my turn to give you an elevator pitch for session 5, which is organized by FAO and the Korea Forest Service counterpart. Session 5 will look ahead and take stock of what we have discussed during the week and look ahead how we can improve collaboration. And the core part of our session will be 3 very innovative dialogues between pairs of speakers. One dialogue will be Paula Sarigumba, a youth champion, talking with Eric Luvia from a timber company in Indonesia. The second dialogue will be Juan Carlos Intiach, who maybe you saw him already before. He's an indigenous leader in the Amazon, talking with Adriana Lucia Santa Mendez, who is a climate negotiator from Colombia. And the third pair is Amy Duchel, who is our colleague, who is a former C4 colleague, talking more from the research side with Alfred Gichu, who is a government representative from Kenya. That's the core part, and then we will hear reflections from Her Royal Highness Princess Basma bin Ali from Jordan, so she will reflect on the whole question of collaboration, and we will close with a musical performance, traditional musical performance from Korea, giving a peace and partnership and well-being message. So that's session 5. See you there. Colleagues, I know we are very late, and let me just close this session by saying that I feel that we are all in agreement with the need to bring forests beyond forestry sector. We heard that from all the speakers. So let's move and let's put this in action. Let's bring this collaboration into fruition and action, and I think we have all a responsibility in this sense. And I would like to invite or hope that you will continue to be with us in our sub-theme 6 sessions, and we wish you a very nice evening. For those of you online, a good day or a good morning wherever you are in the world. Thank you very much, and I would like to give once more a round of applause to the panelists. Unfortunately, John and Shyam had to move to go to another session, but those of the other panelists are still with us. So thank you very much for being with us. And those of you still with us in the room, for your patience and perseverance to be with us, even if it's a bit late. Thank you so much. See you soon again. Thank you.